All right, we are all visible. We're all visible, and I'm just going to do a little bit of tweaking while we're going. Hi, everybody. How's it going? I'm Kelly. I'm the DM, GM, storyteller, host guy over here at Dork Tales. I use he and him as my pronouns, and I'm super excited to have with me, finally, visually, my buddy Sam. I've been trying to get him on here forever, but also the illustrious Travis Legge. This is... Yeah,
Thanks.
I could choose a different adjective if you want.
No, it's fine. I appreciate it. Thank you.
The Illuminatius.
Grand, wise, and luminous.
So why don't
terrible.
we just... theoretically, we also have John Hicks joining us in a bit, but John Hicks from Those Dark Places. But he's in the UK right now, so there might have been like a time thing going on or something. Or it just could be, I have no idea. Could have been a miscommunication. But definitely check out his stuff. It's great. And if there was a miscommunication, it was mine. I was juggling too many plates. So without further ado, let me pass it around. Let's go Travis, Sam. So Travis, introduce yourself to everybody.
Hi, my name is Travis Legge. My pronouns are he, him, or they, and I write games and stream them. And that's pretty much what I do. I'm full-time in both. A lot of the work that I do comes out through Onyx Path, but I also have a publishing company called Aegis Studios. That's me in a nutshell.
Nice. All right, Sam.
Yeah, I'm Sam Young, pronounced he, him. I'm also game writer, designer. I've done actually a little work for Onyx Path as well, although these days I'm mostly doing stuff through the Storyteller's Vault, White Wolf's Storyteller Vault, or whatever is in charge these days, doing Chronicles of Darkness, including Vampire the Requiem. And yeah, I just had a book come out yesterday, so I'm pretty pleased with myself.
Yeah, if you enjoy the Party Monsters game here on Dork Tales, it is using the rules that are from Sam's books.
Yeah, which Kelly has contributed heavily to.
I have to say, Sam, I didn't ask them to only use stuff I wrote. But it just ended up that way.
I remember you told me this. It was and I chose to believe you.
Honestly, you really don't have any choice but to choose to believe me.
They were good ones. They were good ones.
All right, so folks, if you have any questions about writing for tabletop role-playing games, please let us know. There is a ton of stuff that we can talk about in this regard. But this runs the gamut between everything like that Onyx Path does, the World of Darkness, White Wolf, anything from hell, Dungeons and Dragons, GURPS, anything like this. We've probably dabbled a little bit in it, or at least looked at it askance in the case of riffs.
I've written for riffs, actually.
Have you written for riffs? Well,
I've written for the Rifter, which is I have written a published Palladium thing, but the Rifter is largely unofficial or fan third-party stuff like that. But yeah, I wrote an article for the Rifter a few years ago. We could talk about my deep, abiding love of rifts as a setting.
Okay, do it.
No, it's a great setting, and I highly recommend anybody who's into just gonzo, ridiculous sci-fi fantasy where you can have a party that's like literally like a dinosaur, the pirate who rides that dinosaur into battle, a cyborg, and a mech pilot, if you want that to be your party, and like a space wizard, that can be your party in Rifts. And the Palladium system is not the best expression I've come across of it. They did a Savage Worlds port that's like an officially licensed Savage Worlds release for Rifts that's actually amazing. So everyone should go buy it twice.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting. Because like Sam, you like Savage Worlds, right? Like I've heard you talk about that you've played it, right?
I think you must be thinking of someone else. I've done a little I'm somewhat familiar with Deadlands, which is sort of adjacent.
Yeah, because Deadlands is with Savage Land.
Yeah,
Savage Worlds
I've played a lot of the card game for Deadlands, so I know some of the. I do know some of the lore, which is cool.
Sorry, that was mistaken in that case. So how did you guys get into tabletop role-playing writing, or how'd you get into tabletop role-playing games? Sam, I know how you did. It's my fault.
I was embraced.
Yeah, my child. But Travis, how'd you get into it? What was your first game?
Into playing? My first game was Redbox D&D. I had an older brother who was super into Nerd stuff. We actually had a neighbor that lived across the tracks from us in this little 3,000 person town called Mauston, Wisconsin, where I was born. And that neighbor would go to Gen Con and frequently go down to Lake Geneva and all that stuff and come back with like handwritten stuff that he picked up at, conventions, notes, things like that. And so my brother got into D&D, and then my mom was actually my first DM. So
that's cool.
Yeah, I wasn't necessarily good at it, probably, but but that was my first game.
Yeah. I mean, that's awesome though. And then Sam, I broke your teeth in a Sabat Vampire the Masquerade revised game that I ran.
Yeah. And briefly though, my first vampire game was Requiem though, because you ran a very short kind of abortive thing that never went anywhere, because player scheduling and whatnot. But the seed was planted.
And then you totally fell in love with Requiem.
I did, yeah. Which makes me a sort of the odd man out. I know that people love their Masquerade. I love Masquerade too, but I'm the biggest Requiem fanboy in the world, which is why I've done like 5 books of it. No, 6 books of it at this point.
I mean, but you got to write what you love, right? So I'm going to ask you, we just got a question from Trizelta, and I want to ask you the question that every game designer I've ever spoken to hates, which is, how do you do game balance?
Are we talking about like mechanical balance, or are we talking about
like not on your head, but like,
Oh yeah.
So it requires your inner ear.
Okay.
My pat answer to this is that game balance is an illusion, and you should ignore it. But that requires unpacking, because I always think of it as like game balance. I think what people often think of is this mechanic fair in a white room setting where all things are equal? And I think that's kind of a bad way of looking at it. And it depends on the game. Some games are more oriented towards sort of a mechanical even keel, but in things like storytelling games and things like Powered by the Apocalypse and such, I think game balance is the mechanic conducive to having fun, or is it conducive to making everyone's lives miserable? And I think that's a better way to think about it than, is this cheap, or is this useless or whatever. But yeah, I think game balance tends to be kind of overemphasized to some degree, because it's just kind of a mug's game to try to deal with it. There are things that are they're too much, but
yeah, I think that like certain games really play into that, like 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons needs balance a lot more than like Powered by the Apocalypse games, which are almost self-balanced. But what about you, Travis? Like you've done a ton of development.
Well, I was going to say I agree with the room here. I think there's kind of a spectrum, and on one end of that spectrum is like Warhammer, and I don't mean like Warhammer the tabletop game. I mean like you have miniatures that you are moving around on a board, and that you need to really have a good handle on the mathematics, right? That's really important, that the abilities all work at roughly the same operating level, and they are roughly equivalent to one another. And the further you get away from that, and generally, though not always, by introducing more narrative elements to your game, the less important that balance becomes, and the more it becomes about how do I design this particular, be it a class, be it a species, be it a weapon, whatever. How do I design this particular thing to make it super cool for the person who's using it, so they feel like they're rewarded by activating this widget that we've given them, without stepping on the toes of everybody else in the area, right? Because a lot of these game balance arguments that I think spring up usually come from like a competitive place, right? Yeah. Like if my wizard and your fighter are in a fight, how often does that actually come up at your table?
The biggest one. Yeah. the biggest one was always like the old World of Darkness games. Where it was like, well, I'm playing like Vampires, my favorite game. Vampires are better than mages, and it's like the mage players are like, give me an hour and let's see who's, Anyway, but werewolves are the best, says your cousin from the next room. You're like, shut up, Carl.
Right.
I think part of it stems too from what is the role of the game master or the storyteller in the game? Because I think, and maybe this is a mischaracterization, but I think of games like D&D where the game master is kind of assumed to be playing by the same rules as the player character. I mean, all games assume we're all playing by the same rules, but there's an assumption in games like Dungeons and Dragons where the storyteller is assumed to be operating like they are constrained by those rules. Whereas in a more narrative game like Chronicles of Darkness or World of Darkness, the storyteller is more of an interpreter of the world, and their role is more to say like, I guess that works, or or that doesn't work. And they can, I mean, they never say it outright, but you are encouraged to cheat to a certain degree. Player-facing things and storyteller-facing things are very different in games like that. So game balance can be an element of that difference.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. With D&D, yeah, you've pretty much hit it on the head, Sam. Like some of the more recent stuff has put in things like the rule of cool, like do what you think is best for your game. But the fact is that most people who play the game pay less attention to that, or at least half of them do, half of them don't. And particularly like me as someone who runs Dungeons and Dragons as a living, as one of my forms of revenue, I've had to work mechanics into most of my systems that allow me to cheat and to cheat fairly. Right? Yeah. Like I have a little like a force token system. If you ever played, like Doom tokens, where it's like, yeah, no, totally. I'll let you bend the rules a little bit, but then I get to really bend the rules a little harder. But the players lean into it, right? The consent-based role playing is the best role playing. Period. Right. It's the only type you should really be doing. But
I was going to say, I think that's a thing where you get into your concept level mission statements, and one of the things that a game like Dungeons and Dragons, which I love, by the way. I absolutely adore D&D 5e. I'm the line developer for Scarred Lands for 5e.
Which plug the hell out of that, by the way, because y'all should play it if you like heavy metal stuff. Like it's.
I'm gonna tell you all something. I'm gonna tell you all something in as plain of terms as I can tell you without violating any non-disclosure agreements. You should probably go and back Dead Man's Rust on BackerKit if you haven't done so, like this weekend. It might be a really good idea to run over to BackerKit and pick up Dead Man's Rust, the new adventure for Scarred Lands from levels 1 to 10, set in the Hornsell Forest. But anyway, above and beyond that, I was going somewhere before it turned into a sales pitch. No, I love D&D, absolutely. But one of the design conceits of D&D is that it's going to be a combat simulator that's going to have X, Y, and Z rules that are going to be applied equally. And that's reinforced with concepts like bounded accuracy, for example, right? At the end of the day, my chance with my level 12 fighter should be mathematically the same of hitting somebody in the face with an axe as your chance with your level 12 wizard. When, all things considered. Those are expectations that are built into the game. So the more that you, if you're coming to it from this is all I've ever known, or this is my first experience to role playing, that gets baked into your expectation.
Yeah, it's true.
And well, I don't want to say unfortunately, but the reality of the situation is most people who come to this hobby at least pass by D&D on their way through. There was a brief shining moment in the 1990s where that wasn't the case, but for the most part, that's the way in the door. So it becomes a situation, I think, when you're communicating this to your audience, where you either have to drill it in from like the core concept level, which I think StoryPath, once again, not to get to, it's just what I know because I work on it a lot. But Onyx Path StoryPath system does a very, very, very good job of telling you right out the gate, these are the narrative tools that we're going to use for the system. These are the expectations. There's going to be some wiggle room. There is deliberately areas of blur and gray baked into your system, right?
Exactly, right? Like
when you have ambiguity.
When you have a game like Scion or Aberrant, it comes down to like, well, how do you, without going into narrative components, it's really hard to definitively use a structural system to have like an arm wrestling match between the earth and a god, right? Or a foot race between someone who can fly like, theoretically Hermes, or, like, how does this work? You have to find this kind of kludge to fit it in and make it work, because you can't do that with hard numbers.
Right. And so you come up with abstracts. The problem being is that tabletop gamers, I do think a big symptom of this is the D&D influence of it, are not accustomed to marrying those two concepts in quite that way.
It's kind of it's the blessing and the curse of D&D is that it is kind of because of its social or pop culture cachet. That's kind of what gets people into role-playing games, which is good. But D&D is, in its way, is a very specific form of role-playing. It's not very general. It's a very specific, it's combat simulation, it's medieval fantasy, so on and so forth. And then that puts people in a lot of like a mind of how role-playing games should be. So you get a lot of people like watching, actual plays of other games, kind of not quite getting, well, why are they being so loose with the rules? Or why is this just not resolved with a roll, right? So, it's good. There's pros and cons.
It really is interesting, actually, because of Critical Role, for example, is so explosively large in pop culture. And people who watch Critical Role, there's this thing called the Matthew Mercer effect, where people, I'm sure that you both know about it, but for the audience, it's where people go into they start the hobby and they expect their dungeon master, game master to operate on the same level as a professional voice actor and game master who's been running for 30 years of his life. And then they get really disappointed and they become really toxic players, where in reality, what they're looking for is probably not D&D. They're probably looking for Matthew Mercer's play style, which is in Dungeons and Dragons works great, but his narrative component and the way that the game functions with like the way that the players act and all of that is much more akin to a lot of storytelling games.
Right. And there's also like one of the things that I think will be very interesting to look at 10 years from now, because of Critical Role's popularity, sure, but also just some of the general trends that are happening in the game community, right? And the responses to those trends. The let's pull away from alignment entirely as a means of solving a problem, which I'll always say I think is not the way to solve that problem. Okay. Pulling away from alignment, like as a trait of a race, is I'm all for that. That's a good idea, but there's a lot in that alignment system that I think is going to have a negative impact on some settings. I'm not saying they can't be made up for. I'm not saying they can't be addressed, but I think that sometimes that we're throwing a bit of the baby out with the bathwater.
Which we discussed during our history panel. You should.
I caught a portion of it. I missed the baby in the bathwater part, but
no, it's okay. It was Christine ranting about deaths and babies. It happens at the beginning of every panel, really.
Gotcha. Right on. So I think that as these trends continue, it'll be interesting to see, because the core conceit of Dungeons and Dragons, as it was initially conceived, is no longer the core conceit of Dungeons and Dragons today. It was initially a fantasy role-playing game where the majority of the action was constrained around the idea of going into ruins, killing whatever lives there, and taking its stuff.
Yeah, and you leveled up with gold, right?
Right,
like
you leveled up with gold. Yeah. Like you gained experience by the gold or the gold value.
That's too realistic. That's too real world.
Right. Exactly.
How am I going to buy Twitter if I don't fight this dragon?
Right, and furthermore, the way it should have been,
or hire a bunch of other people to do it.
Right, they should have designed it where you just roll your starting gold, and that's the only trait that actually matters on your character sheet. So it could really be capitalism, the role-playing game. But no, I
have that. I just backed that actually. There's where is it? I fucking backed a copy of. What is it? It's called Blood of Tyrants or something like that. It's a game where you're actually going after the 1%, but the 1% are vampires.
Nice.
And it's so cute. It's so cute.
I love it. But yeah, so the point being is that I think in 10 years from now, D&D is going to have a reckoning where it's going to have to deal with how the community has changed the expectations.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's going to knock the feet out from under Wizards of the Coast by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, I have fairly decent confidence they'll rise to the challenge. But
they've got Hasbro money, like
well, they've got Hasbro money, and D&D 6 is coming out in 2024. I think is when they stated. So I'm wondering how that'll evolve.
Did they say 6 or did they say the
next evolution of Dungeons and Dragons is coming? Yeah. So who knows what the hell? It might be 5.5.
I suspect it's going to be 5.5 because they have so much invested into it. But that's, I mean, that
Well,
is a guess from the cheap seats. To be fair.
Exactly, right? Like, he can't really, I don't know. What I'm curious about is, you say in 10 years, because you saw the rise and fall of, like, well, the rise and stumble definitely of, like, I don't know, second party role playing games, because like D&D is always like the mainstream, and then there's like the tributaries, right? So like the White Wolf era of the 90s you were talking about. Do you think we're gonna have a renaissance in 10 years? Do you think that's like people are gonna get sick of D&D and start branching out again? Because
I hope so, but I the thing that we have right now that we didn't then, that I think is going to be good for everyone. It's going to be a case of the high tide rising all boats. Is we have multiple channels of access now and multiple channels of feedback now. It's not so much like if you got into, like, when the original World of Darkness rose to popularity, you really had to either be going to a convention or going to your local game store, you know, involved in the D&D community already. And this was a thing that had to like rip you away kind of from that, right? Not that there weren't other games at that time, because there were, but, you know, market share being what they are, it's much, much smaller. I don't know that anybody's ever going to pull that level of a, you know, David versus Goliath is what happened when the World of Darkness happened, just because we live in a different world that's more connected now. So my guess would be that as these things spring up, a lot of people are going to fall off the hobby regardless of what they're playing right now in 10 years. But the ones that stick around, I think, are going to be a lot more cosmopolitan in their tastes, because they're going to have more, you know, there's going to, I mean, I love D&D too. And I did love D&D. But there was this beautiful moment where I had gotten just sick enough of Dungeons and Dragons when a friend of mine walked into, you know, McDonald's before school with a purple book that had a tarot card on the cover of it. That, like, you know, those two things lined up very well. You know, and so that's how that kind of came about. But I think we're probably going to be looking at a similar situation sometime in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. Nice. So here, I've got a throwback for you. I've got a bunch of books pulled for the next panel.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's the slipcover edition.
That's nice. That is pretty.
Yeah, it's revised, so I know that it's not 100%, but I still haven't removed my M20 from the shrink wrap. So it's a 600-page book. I find it really difficult to use it at the table.
It's right. It's really more of like a conversation piece / home defense weapon.
I just got my copy of Technocracy Reloaded, which is a very nice and sleek and innovative, I suppose, compared to the traditions.
Yeah, it's very slender.
I'm glad you dig it.
I really dig it. I love the Technocracy.
That was
that's a problematic thing to say, maybe, but
no. I mean, I have a great deal of love for them too, from a number of different angles. But that was a book that was very challenging to work on. I'm very proud of how that book turned out. But
so what kind of let's go into that then. Like, what kind of challenges did you have that you can talk about? Like, what makes writing challenging?
Well, I was in a development position on that book, and I came on fairly late in the process. And that book, mage books kind of are developed a little differently than almost any other role-playing book anyway, because they were so like directly overseen. The M20 stuff was, you know, Sater really had his hands in kind of every aspect of it. So taking over one of those, like in midstream, jumping on board of that train, it was really just about trying to keep the train from going off the rails at any point, which I managed, thankfully, largely due to the help of Danielle Lazan, who was my co-developer on that. We managed to steer it into, I think, the place we can all be proud of. But yeah, there was a lot of challenge. There was a lot of like needing to rewrite sections or going in and like, you know, trying to identify some mission statements where things were still a little bit gray. So that's a little bit difficult.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, in terms of like actually like writing, like doing like coming on as a writer as opposed to developer, it's a totally different ball of challenges.
Yeah, I was going to say that it's interesting because I've done a few of these, like, you know, it's storytellers. Well, so it's a little more on the amateur level, but I try to be, you know, have a fairly professional, you know, like
You bring an A game,
a
Sam.
mood. Yeah, I try to.
Like,
yeah.
speaking as somebody who works under you, you are a very, very competent editor. You're a good design lead. Like you do, like you give people their marching orders pretty succinctly, but not. You're pretty good at making people think that changes were their idea. Which is
yes,
the best thing.
That is the trick to it.
You're like, oh, I see what you were going for here. Maybe word it like this differently.
Yeah, maybe do it
times.
this way instead. But I was gonna say it's interesting, especially when you have a project that when you get even into like what is referred to as the development stage, and you're like, oh man, I gotta change. This is not working now, and trying to find like the balance of maintaining what the authors and writers presented you, but also kind of like you have to make it fit the brief, right? And sometimes through nobody's fault really, people haven't fit the brief, or just inadvertently we've moved away from it, and finding that the right touch on that, where to intervene and where not to intervene is always an interesting problem.
Yeah, that's one of the hardest things to cope with, both as a writer and as a developer, is when the natural progression of like ideas, particularly if you're on a project where a lot of people are, because a lot of times on these role-playing books, the writers are given their brief, they go off into their separate areas, they write what they were assigned, and they all turn it in, and it all goes through a developer, and there's very little communication between them. Sometimes you'll have an email chain, sometimes you'll have a Slack or a Discord or something like that, right? The more that the writers are engaged in talking to one another, the more you find these beautiful moments that maybe aren't quite in the brief. But you can also wind up juggling yourself so far afield of the brief that then when you get into that final pass as a developer, you're like, oh, crap, we didn't cover the thing this book is about. For example.
I've had many instances where we've been kind of going through the motions of the book, and somebody will sort of offhandedly write a sentence about X, Y, and Z, or say something, in passing to me, and I'll be like, oh shit, that should have been in the book from the start. Like this recent book we did, one of the writers did a bloodline for vampires, and he kind of mentioned, just sort of in passing things about gargoyles. And I was like, oh, right, gargoyles are in Vampire the Requiem and Vampire the Masquerade for that matter. And there is no second edition version of those. And this is the Gangrel book. And this is kind of like, oh, this should really tie into this. So then I went off after swearing up and down that this would be the book I did the least writing on. I spent like 6,000 words writing up gargoyles from scratch. But it's interesting, like trying to, sometimes it's not even like didn't fit the brief so much as like went in like just sort of for example, I once had a writer submit something that was like very culturally not sensitive, and just to their credit, they did not realize this, and this was in the first drafts. Fortunately, this wasn't like something that got to me later on in the process, but kind of trying to find, and this is maybe moving away from the question, but like as a developer being like, how do you be nice about this? How do you not, how do you be gentle but firm, is a big part of that job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you find that to be easy to do, or like?
I didn't have too much of a problem with it. I mean, you don't want to be like, oh, this is shit. You should feel bad about yourself. But there is a way of saying it, not patronizingly too. Like you should be firm about what the problem is, not try to sugarcoat it. But you should also be like, hey, people make mistakes.
Right.
But there's a balance to that. But I was gonna say, there as another example of like the great things coming from collaboration. I remember we doing this Nosferatu clan book, and you, Kelly, and another writer came up with he was doing an older bloodline. You were doing
you're talking about some Mike's thing,
and they were very similar concepts. They were different, but there were just enough overlap there that I was like, well, these guys should have some sort of connection. And I think I put you two to working on whatever that was, and I think it was a really cool thread that we don't usually have in the books. like this sort of
Yeah,
antagonism.
these two bloodlines hate each other.
Yeah,
they were close, just close enough to be enemies.
Yeah, and
Nice.
it helped develop both of their backstories in interesting ways, and it had like, here's an inbuilt plot hook for both of these character types that you can use it or you not use it as you see fit.
See, and I love the little plot hooks. I think that's like when if we're talking about Onyx Path stuff, the Dark Eras books, and so my two favorite things that Onyx Path has put out for any Chronicles of Darkness stuff are Dark Eras and Night Horrors. Because there's just so much, like I'll flip through a Night Horrors book and be like, oh, there's an entire entire chronicle right there, just about this guy, or about this,
right.
you know. And that's why I was really happy to work on Night Horrors for your vampire books, because I just think they're so fun, and the Dark Eras are so compressed and juicy.
Yeah,
they're so much fun. They're so much fun to stream, because you get a day where everybody dresses like a pirate, says "Yar," and then everyone dies at the end. It's great.
Well, antagonists are a really fun thing to write for role-playing games, because they both serve the purpose of, okay, if you know, here's the bad guy of the week, but also here are a bunch of story hooks that you can use in other ways, not necessarily even directly related to antagonism. Like, you know, I think in not to go back too much on this current book that we've done, Kelly wrote these things called hunting grounds, which are like vampiric locations, not just, you know, humans. And I was thinking about how like it's a really cool hook as just like, this could just be a side thing that's happening off in the corner, and like you could radiate out issues relating to this thing. Like you never even have to go there. You just, you know, meet the various victims of it, and it just like, you know, antagonists create really interesting plot hooks, especially like weird ones. Like the out of context villain is always interesting in World and Chronicles of Darkness, because so many people are like, well, that's a vampire and that's a mage and that's a werewolf. But then if you can introduce the thing that's like, what is this? Which is kind of the ethos of Hunter the Vigil, but I think you can do that in all the games, really.
Well, I think having like as a writer, like and writing games for people to play, I personally think that the best games that I've ever played have been ones where the antagonists were really well defined from the beginning. I think this is my biggest problem, and this is not, I'm not talking about the designers or the writers here, but a game like Mage the Ascension that has inbuilt 3 of the best antagonists, 4 if you count mages against themselves, but the Technocracy, the Marauders, and the Nefandi are 3 of the best antagonists that you could pit them against, right? And then when we transitioned over to like early Mage the Awakening, like first edition, whenever I played the game, I didn't know what I was supposed to do, right? Like, and I know that the idea is like you can do whatever you want, but I'm like, well, but what does a mage do with their day, right? Like, what's the built-in conflict? In second ed, that's much more defined, and like there's a lot more mixed in. But it's like I love that, like having something to know what I'm doing, and it's really interesting. I both of you are mage heads. I'm really curious about your opinion on this. I did a ranking video for Chronicles of Darkness.
Oh yeah,
a little while ago on a dare, and for one, thank you everybody who watched that. That was really surprisingly well received. But I had someone leave a comment that said that they really loved Mage the Awakening because they considered Mage the Ascension's viewpoint, this might be a little out there to talk about for this, but to be like fascistic.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It was just kind of like, huh.
I mean, you can read. I mean, if you take a shallow view of anything, you can find fascism there.
I suppose so.
I could see. I can certainly see where that might come from, but I don't. I don't know. I agree. I don't really agree with that.
Here's the beautiful thing about Mage the Ascension, and one of the more frustrating things about writing it. It's a game that is absolutely about fascism. But it's also absolutely about resistance. It's also absolutely about recapturing your inner childhood. It's also absolutely about wasted or achieved potential. It's about whatever you want it to be about. And even within the conflicts that are laid out for you by the setting, there's a great deal of room to explore in there, because all of those things can be true, because it's a fantasy world where all of those things can be true. In the really real world, fascists probably never going to be the good guys. In a fantasy world, you know, you can wrestle with some philosophical questions, like, you know, my favorite self-explanation for technocracy characters is, I understand that you don't like the loss of personal freedom, but how do you feel about indoor plumbing and not being eaten by a dragon?
Yep.
You know, like these are again, these are fantasy things. We don't have that Sophie's Choice in the real world. You know,
I think the thing that makes Mage the best game is exactly what you're saying there, right? Is that no matter how you play it, it's about something. Like because there's so many games where you can only play them one or two ways. You can play Mage as almost any type of game. You can play it as a superhero game. You can play it as a teen like sex dramedy. You can play it as any genre.
Right.
It's really cool, and it still works. Like you can play any game like that, but it doesn't always work. So
true.
for writing, I'm curious how you all got into writing, but I'm also curious that if you could choose to be a writer for any game line, what would it be?
I've already written.
Yeah, you're out of this. You've done it.
I mean, there's a couple I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't mind doing like an official D&D book. That'd be fun.
Yeah,
it'd be fun. It'd be fun to do one once. Yeah, they would all be like this would be neat at some point.
Okay.
I've never written for Shadowrun. That would be a lot of fun. I would love to write for Shadowrun.
How do you feel? Do you like the way that Shadowrun's developed over the years?
For the most part, I'm not up on the latest edition of Shadowrun. The last edition I played was fifth.
I think we're in. Are we in seventh or eighth?
I think it's
now?
Sixth at this point.
Is it sixth at this point?
Maybe I've also
games develop so quickly. It's like watching Cell Division,
especially as you get older.
Yeah, well, especially when you have a property like Shadowrun that hopped owners a couple times.
Yeah, it really did.
But no, my like favorite Shadowrun edition is probably third, just because it's probably what I played the most of. But yeah, no, I would love to write for Shadowrun. That'd be cool.
I guess I'm kind of also out of the running for this question because I also have worked on the game I wanted to. Because I've worked on an official Requiem supplement, which is you can tell what my favorite game is based on my output. But also developed by Danielle Lazon, who is really wonderful. And I was trying to get to
Danielle's amazing.
Quick anecdote. The one time I've ever been had a developer be like, "Hey man, this power is super broken," and she was correct.
I'm really curious. I know you can't talk about it.
Oh no, I could. The game is out. The book is out. It was. I don't want to distract from kind of the point of the conversation. It was this sort of entropic discipline power, and I had just kind of like worked it out for like what it was capable of doing was too good. It was truly too good. But that was I don't remember like all the details, but anyway, that was sorry. Side note.
That's okay.
But if I had my druthers, I don't know if there will be any in the future, but I would love to work on another Night Horrors book for any of the Chronicles of Darkness games, because I've worked on like 3 of them, I think, maybe 4, and I always
you worked on that many of them. You worked on Enemy Action.
I worked on Enemy Action and the Beast. No, I didn't do the Beast one. I did.
You worked on Shunned by the Moon, right?
No, I did the Promethean one, the Demon one, and the Vampire one, the new Vampire one. Vampire has like 3 Night Horrors books.
Yeah, they're all really good.
They're all,
and especially Wicked Dead was the one that I've used to gross the most people out.
I do love Wicked Dead.
The stuff about the tongue parasite.
We got to update those in our Nosferatu book, which was fun.
They're so good. They're so good. Check it out.
But yeah, I'd like generally a Night Horrors book. But I mean, Chronicles of Darkness, like Storyteller's Vault, really is wonderful in that you can do stuff with those properties. I would like, non-Chronicles of Darkness, non-World of Darkness, I think like the Star Trek RPG, the current one, I would love to get a chance to work on that. That's a really fun system. Nice. And it really captures, I think, the essence of Star Trek.
Nice. I'm just gonna basic out and say probably Mage, just because it's my baby. But like that, or if they were gonna do like a 5th edition of like Demon the Fallen or something like that, because that'd be fun. Like the fiction and the setups of Demon the Fallen were so good. They were so good. I have read the book so many times and I played it 0 times because it's one of those where it's like, how do you get the right cast to play with that, right? Like, it's especially when you were casting in the Edgelord days when that book came out.
Especially Demon the Fallen is pretty edgelordy.
It's super edgelordy.
I love it. I absolutely
love it. It can be really good. Like it's Wraith adjacent, right? Like there's Chris is in the chat screaming about Demon right now.
I have some complaints about Demon, but I've gone through and tried to fix them as much as I could.
What is your complaint? So, okay, Travis, you probably know this. I think I've imagined this power, or this mechanic in it, but I seem to remember somewhere, either in one of the side books or a forum, that explained what your permanent faith score was good for. And I think it was supposed to be it limits your successes on your lores.
I don't remember what
or something
it
like
was
that.
supposed to be. I have a series of books that one day I promise I'll finish. That is intended to take the power structures and all the mechanical fiddly bits of Demon of the Fallen and port them into being in rules compatibility with 20th anniversary edition conceits.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And in doing so, that has afforded me the opportunity to fix a few. Like, I don't like the way that faith works at all in Demon of the Fallen. I think
it's really weird.
It just doesn't work, right? System. So I've changed that. And a lot of the powers, I think you can tell where maybe they were porting stuff over from a vampire discipline and didn't do their due diligence about making it work different. You know? So a little bit of that was kind of at play as well in the work I've been trying to do to rework it.
So, okay, interesting. I'd like to see those when you finally finish that. Hit me up.
Yeah, I'll send them over. I've got a bunch of them up right now. I do one like set of lores.
Was this on your Patreon?
It's on Storyteller's Vault.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I remember you did. I think I bought one or two of those. Because I'll buy anything Demon of the Fallen related.
Okay. So I'm going to ask this question because we got a question from Chef Aladeth. We'll get to you in just a sec, dude. I promise. But I've got a real question. So a lot of aspiring writers out there, like Sam, you and I both went to the same writing school.
Yeah.
Where they kind of blow smoke up your ass about like being able to survive as a writer. What is the key to being able to be sustainably a writer in tabletop role-playing games? Like, is it to treat it as a hobby? Is there a way to do it where you can kind of work your way in to have it actually be a source of income? Travis, you and I've had tons of talks about this, like off camera, and you've talked about like the sheer bulk that you put out is just impressive.
Thank you. And
dude,
yeah,
it is.
That is one approach, is just always be doing it. It's hard to transition to always be doing it though when you have a day job, right? And like,
well, how did you get into writing? Like, how did you get into doing this?
I'm going to give you the most frustrating answer that you're ever going to hear, and you'll hear it from a lot of people that are professional in creatives in any industry. No, there's no like golden path. If there was, we'd take it. In my case, I started writing as a hobby. I've always wanted to write for a living, right? I think I sent my first writing submission to White Wolf when I was 15 or 16.
Oh wow.
I've always wanted to write, but I put out my first role-playing game as a hobby with some friends while I was working at a gas station. I put out some stuff here and there while I was working various day jobs. And when I got really was able to become a full-time creative, it's because I had just finished college and my job got outsourced. So I got a reasonable severance package and a year worth of pretty much guaranteed unemployment. And so I turned that into my writing time. And I turned that into putting in the work and grinding the gears. And most of my work at that point was in the film business. So, I mean, I did a decade in film before I came over to role-playing games full-time. And the reason for that was I got tired of having my heart ripped out every 18 months, every time I put a movie out. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different winding paths. I think the thing that brought me personally to the level of success that I was able to achieve to where I could really do it for a living was getting spotted doing community content stuff. Which I cannot advocate highly enough. If you want to be a writer in this business, make community content. Doesn't have to be Storyteller's Vault. Go to the Miskatonic University, go to DM's Guild, anywhere where you can use an existing IP and create for them and get a chunk of what you're making, because you have a ready-made audience there that's waiting for your content. all you got to do is show them what you can do.
And I think that community content stuff is a great way, and this will sound weird, it's a great way to learn how to fail. Because I believe there's this Samuel Beckett quote that I love, which is fail, fail again, fail better. And I think that is genuinely like just learning, make mistakes. Like it's a good way to learn what not to do. And there, once I was with a talk somewhere, I think it was like some of the Welcome to Night Vale guys, and this isn't related specifically to RPGs, but one of them was saying like, it's okay if your art is a little disposable. Like, just move on to the next art, you know, because you've learned doing art is in itself like a useful thing to do. And the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. And it's okay if the first few things you put out are shitty or by your later standards, because you've got a wealth of experience now. Like, and I mean this in the positive way, but you fail upward, you know, like you keep plugging away at it. And community content is great because sometimes, and you do have to pull fingernails to get it, but sometimes someone will leave you a review. And
I cherish every single review like that we get.
I don't know what the magic is of getting reviews. It's I don't know what, some people are just, it's a magic.
Yeah, it's really cool. And one other pro to that is as you gain your skills, especially with community content, you're afforded something that I, am not afforded when I'm writing on a professional project. The no writer is the ability to go back in and fix stuff.
Yes, I've changed so much stuff.
If somebody tells me that there's a mistake in Yugman's Guide to Gelspad for Scarred Lands, now available in PDF and POD, I can't do anything about that. I can say, wow, that sucks. I can say, here's my opinion on how to fix that, but there's nothing I can do about that mistake that's in that book that somebody else published. But if one of my Sluritian Vault supplements has a mistake in it, I can go in, edit the file, throw it back up. Now, am I going to have enough time to do that? No, because I don't say no to things enough. But I
look where you are today. So for writing and stuff like that, I mean, I think we're kind of in a weird place, like being able to do community content stuff and have people support and have things like if you start getting a little bit of a following, having something like Patreon, right, that really can keep you going and stuff like that. Like Travis, you were talking about how like you got into it because you got outsourced. It's the same thing with Dork Tales. Largely, I was doing Dork Tales like once or twice a week, and then I lost my contracts ended, and then we had this small cold that went around for a couple of years, and I was on EI, and I was like job hunting, and then I was like, okay, well, I'm losing my mind. Like I'm going into like a really dark place where I can't create anything. But if I do a scheduled thing every day, I can be creative. I can do the stuff that I love anyway, which is performance and writing. And
similar thing kind of happened with me with you, Kelly, in that like end of 2020 my job ended, but then I had like basically a full year of EI, and I had done a few Storytellers Vault things which were somewhat successful, and I basically had all the time in the world to just get better at it and learn things like InDesign and Illustrator and getting better at Photoshop and stuff like that. So like
getting back into drawing too, you started doing that.
That was
done a lot of art in your own books, which is a great cost saver.
Very cost effective is to be able to paint. Like that turned out to be a really good thing to have. Well, that was funny. Like part of the reason that happened was, as happens in RPGs, development of RPGs, there are delays, and there was kind of a point. I can't remember which book it was, but I was waiting for drafts, and I was like, I could just mess around in Photoshop and not stress about this. And I kind of rediscovered some skills that had laid dormant. So that was a useful thing to do.
Well, and that's one of the basic components, that maybe people don't necessarily like to hear, but at the end of the day, your biggest thing that you need is time. You need to put time into it.
Yeah.
Whether that's because you suddenly find yourself unemployed, or that's because you sacrifice a whole bunch of stuff that you normally would be doing, or a little bit of both, But the investment of time is going to get you there.
Speaking of time, what are your production schedules look like? How much time do you put in a day writing? Like what does your writing look like? Because mine is very disorganized. Like I always am very vocal on the channel about like dealing with my attention deficit disorder and like cycling my brain meds to make sure that I'm like maximized for this and maximized for that. And then having the inevitable rebound where I'm not usable for a day or two, right? Like, so I try to do the best. But like, what are your schedules like? Like, how do you find the time, or how do you structure it?
I mean, it's tricky because I wear a lot of hats for this stuff, and I'm sure Travis, this is true of you too, because I'm doing like the layout, I'm doing art stuff, I'm doing the development work and the editing work. So actually, something that's happened as time's gone by is I've had less of an emphasis on doing writing, just because I can't do I can't do as much writing as I was doing before. Although I'm trying to up that a bit, but I think I try, at least if I have like a specific project, I actually try to do most of the writing in a fairly like quick turnover, whether that, a few days or a couple of weeks, after procrastinating on it endlessly. Because my talent, I find, is in the editing booth. Like I'm that's where I feel like I shine as a writer, because once I get down what I need to get down, which is always the struggle for me, I find it much easier to refine stuff. So, my method is not transferable to anyone except myself, but that is what it is.
I don't know. It sounds pretty apt. Actually, it seems pretty close to the way it is for me. Getting me in the chair is the hard part.
Yeah, you got to get there first.
Yeah.
Well,
Travis,
I was going to say, one of the things that I do to compensate for that very problem is I do my writing in the morning. I look at usually about once a month, but sometimes if I have a lot of stuff going in and out, I'll do this more often. I will sit down and I will do the math and double and triple check the math because I'm terrible at math. And I will see how many words per day I need to write to hit all my current deadlines. And then I will note that in Trello, like this job needs X words per day. And the first thing I do in the morning, I have a couple of little administrative tasks I need to do. If I have something that I can start and then walk away from, I will kick that off. Like I do a lot of video and audio editing. So if there's something like, I need to render this out, I can get that cooking or whatever, right? But for the most part, I start my day and I write until I hit my goals. And sometimes that means that I write for 2 hours that day, and then I screw off and get stoned and play video games for the rest of the day. Nice. Sometimes that means I write until I fall over at my desk. You know what I mean? And I still don't hit my goal. And that's just how it works. But again, being alleviated of the burden of actually having to be anywhere at any specific time helps immensely. I can sit and write for 12 hours on some days, on most days if I need to.
When you're in the zone and you get the flow, that's heaven. I did a 16-hour day the other day, and I was like, "Oh my god, I miss this so much. This is so good. Everything worked."
I think it's from a Stephen King novel. He compares it to like falling into a hole. When he's staring at the page and he's looking for the hole. I think it's from Misery, so there's some issues there. But
I mean, Stephen King used to have far more like cocaine in his writing process than I generally have. But
this ATM called me an asshole.
but no, the other thing is like I am a bit odd in that I often transcribe more than I write. I do my best writing when I'm not at my desk. If I'm at the shower, if I'm taking a walk, if I'm washing dishes, that's when I'm coming up with things. So by the time I sit down to write, it's often the limit is my typing speed, which is atrocious, which is also one of the ways that the universe balances itself out. Maybe game balance should be more of a thing, but because I don't type fast. So I routinely am frustrated that I can't get the ideas out of my head fast enough.
Have you tried text to speech or something like that?
I'm a Midwestern mumbler. Yeah.
Oh, fair.
So it takes me 5 hours to post a TikTok because I have to go through and re-edit the entire automatic caption feature.
It's tricky too because it can affect your voice after a while. There's a certain way you have to speak, and if you do lots and lots of it.
Computer, tea, Earl Grey, hot.
Except if you're Patrick Stewart, but that
right. If you're a traditionally trained Shakespearean,
you're gold, but you don't need,
you have better things to do than
you don't need to write
write
for a living. So
exactly.
you just need to speak for a living. It's great.
Yeah.
All right, let's bang some of these questions in the chat out. So, how do you feel about, or how do you write in enemies that are too much? I think this is in like module design, or like encounter design for. They're too much for the players. Basically, when you are preparing an antagonist in a set event or instance, do you add in environmental things that can help like balance the scales type of thing, or hints or things like that? And that kind of like that almost like video game design philosophy type of thing. So like I guess so like Travis, like specifically for you, like with Dead Man's Rust being like a full like what was it called, a mega adventure module?
Yeah, it's a mega campaign is what
campaign.
What the marketing boys decided to call it. Yeah, it's
back. Mega's back. I didn't know we were using Mega.
I guess Mega is back. Yeah, it was a precursor to Aberrant. No, but yeah, it's huge. It's levels 1 to 10. But there was a question you were going to ask, and I cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, I think so. It was basically like so in any of the larger encounters. I'm assuming that there are like some fairly large encounters or some boss encounters.
Sure.
Do you do play balance things where there are supplemental resources in the room besides just what the party brings to bear?
Depends. And I'm least of all likely to do it in D&D. To be honest with you.
Okay.
D&D tends to have. And again, this is the conceit of, this is you, the conceit of punching your weight, knowing which ring you're fighting in. Dungeons and Dragons tends to be based a lot around your preparation. The room state is going to be X when you arrive in the room. What did you bring to be ready for what's in that room? That's usually the way that D&D encounters are designed, right? But if I'm writing for, say, Story Path, it's a totally different thing. And the system, once again, I'm leaning on mechanics that are built to accommodate that. StoryPath has things like fields and atmosphere. These are things that are already mechanized in the system, right? So I would say if you're really looking for the answer to that question, the best way to do is to look at the best examples of that game, that the sessions that you really remember and enjoyed. Did you and your party run through Elemental Evil back in 3E? Crack that book open, look through it, and look at how those rooms are built. Look at what of that experience you're trying to recapture. Or look at a more contemporary one. If you've never written one before, maybe you haven't even played much. Maybe you've only played, Wild Behind the Witchlight or whatever, right? Mm-hmm. Grab a couple of other books, go on D&D Beyond, whatever. Look at other adventures and how they're structured and say, okay, this is the thing I want to try to emulate. So at the end of the day, we are in a society that has never had this much exposure to a broad array of ideas before, right? We're, we've only got 2 decades of internet communication under our belts as a species.
Oh, don't say that. That's crazy to think of.
Right.
That's wild.
So the idea that you're going to come up with, but there's thousands of years of written history and then beyond that before you. So the idea that you're going to come up with something new, unique, interesting, and cool, probably not. You're going to come up with a new combination of ideas that people have already had. So own that and dive in, do your research, figure out what it is that you want to emulate, and then write to that would be my advice.
So, sorry, go ahead, Sam.
I was going to say, because I haven't written a lot of like scenarios in that of that type, but I think
yet,
but what I relate back to is I think of like, given circumstances, which is something that they talk about in theater. And I definitely think of things like that in terms of like when I write sample characters, not just like, antagonists or whatever, but just characters who are offered up in a book to be like, this guy can exist in your game. Maybe they offer this, that, and the other. And I always try to make sure to think of like, what are their secrets? What are their motives? And those are things that a storyteller can have in their back pocket if the players encounter this person, or if they do something strange and spark off a different thought. So it's not related necessarily to environment, but it is related to like the mise en scene or the you know, the given circumstances of the character.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. All right, so another question we have coming up here. Also, Travis, you mentioned Wild Beyond the Witchlight. Sam, I know you're not much of a D&D guy. If you ever gave a module a try, Wild Beyond the Witchlight is a module that's designed to be beaten without combat. If you want to,
I like that.
You can just role play through the entire thing. We're running it on the channel, and it's honestly a breath of fresh air. Because if they want to fight, they can get one. But for the most part, they're just talking to fairies and mushrooms and stuff, and it's so much fun. It's literally a gateway drug for
other games.
For other games, yeah, for games where you're not all about punching things and using armor classes and things. It's great. Okay, cool. So would you recommend focusing when you're writing? Would you recommend focusing on one program, game line, etc., or trying to spread out and write for different game lines or different game lines or systems or things like that?
I think, I mean, from my own experience, by default it's the one program, mostly because I'm so familiar with those settings and those rules. But I don't think there's anything wrong with either. I don't think there's a right answer there, because go with what you're good at is kind of what I would say. And the thing that you enjoy more. Because honestly, if you're going to go do, D&D stuff and you don't know a lot about D&D, I mean, there's, you can learn about it, but I would say, like, at least to begin with, go with the things that you know best, and then start to branch out if you feel a need to branch out.
Yeah, I would concur with that. There's always going to be, I don't think you can be too diverse in your production, right? But you can certainly over diversify your attention. So I would say, if you are someone who is inclined to be a cosmopolitan consumer of games, if you're inclined to want to read 10 different books, inclined to want to play 10 different games, then hit every one. You know what I mean? Get anything that's got a community content, get something out for it. If you're not, don't force it, because you're going to write crap. You're not going to enjoy it. It's going to be no fun. If you can teach yourself the discipline of looking at a setting that you're not actually interested in and creating functional and enjoyable material for that setting, then you've done 90% more work than a lot of people that are working professionally in this business do on you know what I mean? Like, and that's not a slam. That's just the reality. It's not, diversifying is not necessarily something that people prioritize.
I was thinking
in that sense.
It's funny that you relate to that you mentioned that, Travis, because I was thinking, I wrote early on in doing RPG stuff, I worked on a book called the Pack for Werewolf the Forsaken. And one of the things I got assigned to do was writing about regular degular wolves as pack mates. And I can't remember if I asked for it, or if it was just like, luck of the draw, but I remember thinking, I find this concept kind of boring, so I need to make it interesting for me as a player and as a storyteller. And that really helped me come up with some interesting stuff with that. And I've seen a lot of praise for that section online, which always surprises me, because it is, I think I've said this to Kelly, it's always the thing that you're not confident about that people really dig. Like it's the thing you banged out in 30 minutes, and the other thing you sweated over for 2 weeks. Yeah, and the developer is like, the thing that you put your heart's blood into is like, oh, this is okay, but it really needs a lot of work. And then that thing you banged out in 5 minutes is like, oh, this is brilliant.
Right.
So doing wolves like that was really helpful. Not that I banged it out in 5 minutes, but doing something that I wasn't personally as interested in really improved my ability to get into things of that ilk. Nice. So there's a really quick one to touch on right here from Wonka that is for stories, and I'm assuming for like just any type of writing. Do you always write a draft and then review it and then modify it? So yes. I think the number one thing, so from writers to non-writers, everything is revision. Yeah. Everything is editing. Everything is multiple drafts. I'm having a good day. If you go and read the vampire books that Sam put out, if my fiction took less than 4 additional drafts, I really nailed it right off the bat. But you change everything
Like, and
Yeah,
everybody
you
has a
really-
different
you
editing
really do.
style. Stephen King's editing style is he writes the book and then he puts it in a drawer for 6 months and then he eviscerates it until it works.
Mhm.
But he gives it 6 months off while he's writing the next novel to clear his head. Because it's you got to get space. You got to, because you will just not see the problems. At least I can't.
That's one way of actually, even just like at a fundamental, like a mechanical level, looking at like typos and things, you need to get away from this. Even just look at it at a different screen, like look at it on your phone or stuff, you know, like, because your brain gets adjusted to reading it and things in a certain way, and you don't find like the weird rhythms in your writing because you're just, you know how it works on this screen. So
well, and you glaze it over. Also, thank you for the donation, the real Oper. Good, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Anything you can do to divorce yourself from the experience of putting those words on that page before you go back to it. For some people, for a lot of people, it's printing out a physical copy of it. Changes things out. For me, because I've done so much and the way I've done my work, I will always find the majority of the things I find when I see something laid out. Because I'm so used to doing my own layouts and whatnot that it's very, I start to like go typo blind and issue blind until I see it in columns with its background in place and stuff like that.
It's funny. I like to, whenever I do release a book, I like to go on the Onyx Path forums and other places and do excerpts, just as like, it's a way to keep people, you know, keep the book in people's minds and things like that. But I also do it because I find the typos, because I copy, you know, things into the forum post.
What is that? That's not Goodwin's law. What law is that? The best way?
Gaiman's law.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I plug it in like, oh yeah, there's that egregious typo. I know I read that passage yesterday. I did not find that.
So
yeah, revision is everything. Everything is revision in writing.
And my number one advice that I would give to people when I was a professor for that brief golden period is read it out loud. If you because you will never find a typo as quickly as when you're trying to read it to someone else. Right, it's just like with Sam in the forums, right, or printing it out, because then you've got it printed out and you're reading it, and when you flub, someone that embarrassment will make you catch it.
Because sometimes I've definitely received like drafts from people who are new to doing writing, and like from people who speak English as a first language, and I'll read it and be like, this is incomprehensible, and I realize it's because they didn't read it out, because in their head it makes sense, but they never actually put it on their tongue. And that can make all the difference.
And there is a value to the approach of just one of the things I recommend to writers that are starting out is write garbage, because the work you're doing is really going to be the rewrites anyway. So you get that garbage on the page, and then you can go in and chisel away and find the gold that's in there.
Yeah,
because there will be. You know,
you get stage fright.
Right. Yes, absolutely. There's nothing more intimidating than looking at a blank, screen with the one little cursor just blinking in the corner by itself.
How many notebooks does everybody own? Because I own about 150 notebooks that are too precious to put my crap words in. Right?
I don't write manually. I would never.
Yeah, I don't anymore.
But they're so pretty.
I do have notebooks, but I just don't. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Zach, for the donation of the beast.
That's awesome.
So what would you consider a good resource to help someone convert from novel writing style to tabletop role-playing game writing style?
That's tricky.
That is very tricky.
I'll come with this from a slightly different angle, because that's not my background in writing. My background in writing is theater and film, and which is a very different practice, but I think actually in some ways is more conducive to role-playing games.
Kane enters stage left.
Yeah. Well, you just
pursued by Garu.
Yeah, but of
comes
course,
in real handy doing art notes, by the way. But continue.
Yeah, but like writing prose is a useful skill in role-playing games. I mean, it depends. If we're talking about like crunchy stuff or mechanics, it doesn't translate as well. But like doing descriptions of stuff, like writing just like, I don't want, essays is the wrong word, but like the part of the book that tells you about the things in the RPG, like it's kind of nonfiction meets fiction in a very weird way. Like because you have to kind of find the places where you're going in character and out of character, and what's in this world and what's in our world. So it's tricky. I don't know what there's no perfect way to do it.
One thing that might help is if you look for a lot of these places will have a style guide on their
read
website.
The style guide.
Yeah, read the style guide.
Read the fucking style guide. I don't mean to swear.
It's a good way to learn, is read that style guide, look for it. Just reading the core book is often a good practice too, because we don't, as gamers, ever interact with our core book from front to back. We don't do that.
It's true.
You know what I mean?
I've met a couple people who do. It's weird. Like they're
like, who are these people?
Right, I think Christine's one of them, actually. Like, she starts at the beginning and just goes, but that's how she absorbs information. She's just like, I think she's an alien.
But even if you're reading it that first time through like that, which is, in my experience, a rarity in the gaming culture, you're not on a routine basis interacting with it in that fashion. In a routine basis, you're cracking open to look at the rule for how your spell works. So understanding that what you're writing is part prose, part technical manual, part nonfiction, part fiction, you're encompassing several different writing styles, and the balance of those is going to be based in the style guide of the thing that you're working on.
That's interesting.
As it relates to like style guide stuff, and this just, I don't know if this will come up organically, but it makes me think of this. One, don't worry too much about being good, at least not at first. Like, you're going to learn on the job. Learning is kind of how you do this game. But the best way to get hired and rehired is A, read the style guide, B, get your stuff in on time, be polite, and like when your developer or editor tells you change this, change it. And it varies, of course, when you're doing your own work on community content stuff, but like when you work for a company, you are a hired gun. And it's good to think in terms, like, get into that mindset. It's okay if the developer doesn't like what you wrote and wants you to change it, because you're writing to fit a brief, and that's the job. And it's good not to be too precious about these things. And like, just the people I've seen rehired are the people who follow those briefs, and I mean, they're good. Good writers get more work, but
well, nobody wants to hire someone who wants to be an auteur.
I mean, right? Well, no one wants to hire
if you're
jerk.
Developing well, yeah, that's that same thing.
Yeah,
but like nobody, like, yeah. Sorry, Travis.
I was gonna say, here's the thing: if you want to be an auteur, you can in this business.
You can, yeah.
But you have to. Then you are now assuming all of the risk of the job. And the reward is that you don't have anyone telling you what to do. But the problem is, then that means you're the one that has to originate the work, right?
You have to answer to you.
Right. You have to. Nobody's going to be there to be your taskmaster.
If you want to be the boss, you have to be the boss.
Right. And so, like, the other one ingredient that I would add, kind of to what Sam said, which I agree 100% with, is enthusiasm. If you you have to learn how to mitigate your enthusiasm so that you can be passionate about what you're doing, and perhaps even passionately make the case for the thing that you wanted to include in a book, right? But also be able to then take that and 100% refocus that enthusiasm on applying the notes you were given.
Yeah.
Right. And be able to meet that with the same energy as you're passionately generating the initial draft, passionately defending your, your thoughts on it. And I think that reads, if you're able to thread that needle, that reads very well to developers too. And
I find like 99% of the time, the developer's right. they're usually right. Like,
that's why they're the developer, right?
Yeah. And sometimes they'll make a wrong call, but generally speaking, they're the developer. They know what they're doing.
So we had a question here from, I believe it was Crimson Galaxy, that was, I'll boil it down to, how would one get started with doing any writing for role-playing games as someone with major ADHD and can't focus on minutia once it becomes enrapturing? Is that something that y'all want to touch on? Like, it's close to my heart. You got to find your focus state. So all ADHD is different. There are so many different versions and ways of processing it. But if you can shut out those distractions and find your focus point, like when you go into that hyperfixation and flow, that is the min-max, the max part of the ADHD experience, that's when you want to get it in. On top of that, use every technique at your disposal: Pomodoro, coffee, have friends check in, working mates. There's so many ways to get you writing better. Sorry, I've got like a thing. But besides that, I think the hardest thing actually for ADHD writers is probably rejection sensitivity.
Yeah.
Because it creates this paralysis that keeps you away from writing, because writing itself is a pleasurable activity once you get over the first speed bump. Like once you get into the flow, it's beautiful, but it's painful to get over that bump. And particularly if you're someone who suffers with something like a dopamine deficiency or any type of ADHD thing, it can be very hard to take that first step. It's a new term that I just heard for the first time a little while ago. I don't know if it's a new term, but it's new to me. That is situational inertia.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
And so switching gears mentally into new things. Like, I love going to the gym. I love lifting weights. Getting to the gym is the hardest part of my day sometimes. But when I'm there, I can work out for 2 hours straight and go home happy. But getting in the door is really difficult. And if you're neurotypical, people might have a much easier time with this. If you have ADHD, try to find a reward system that works for you, or an accountability system, or, like I said, co-working is very popular, even if it's digital co-working. We just got rated a little bit ago by Natasha Tuskovich Designs, who Natasha's a player on the channel sometimes. She does a lot of co-working streams where you can just have her on next to you and you get that office feel, which is really useful. And it's the part of working in an office that's actually good for you, where you can go, yes, someone else is working, so I have to work. when the pandemic started, Christine's office is on the other side of the wall. Like, there is a sliding door that separates us. And when she was working from home, it was the best thing ever, because I would get up and I have to work because she's working. If I'm not working, if I'm playing video games, I'll feel guilty. So I have to work. When she went back to work in person, my productivity, it started to, it caused a bunch of anxiety. So, do what you can. Also, go hit us up in the Discord. Ask us stuff like that too. We've got a bunch of people there who have some great techniques for this. Like Paradoxical Ghoul knows a bunch of really good ones that might work for you better than they work for me. But it's all about trying to find workarounds of that problem.
I have so far avoided pinning down any sort of diagnosis of how I'm neurodivergent, but I'm pretty sure I probably am in some way or another. And one of the things that I suffer from is the difficulty of getting things started. And this is a place where the style guide can actually save you. One way to get that ball rolling is to format your document, to go through and say, these are the headers I need to hit. This is what's on the brief. So by the time you're done with that, you're like, oh crap, I've written 300 words of this game book already.
That's
Holy
good.
crap.
That's really good. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then you get that little dopamine hit, and then you're like, hey, no, I can sit and write all day. You know?
Exactly. Whenever I'm writing anything that has like notes or like Sam for our book a little while ago, the Venture book, there was the David book had a bunch of history stuff. So I grabbed a document, went to Wikipedia, copied a bunch of stuff over. So I'm like, here's a historical setting that I need to like paraphrase.
Yeah, no, it's really useful.
And then I'm like, my word count's already at 1,000.
I have to change all the words, but that's editing is
that's future Kelly's problem.
That's tomorrow me problem. I was gonna say, like, in terms of minutia, it's kind of, RPG writing often is kind of all about minutia, and the trick can kind of be finding what the minutia you enjoy most. And then if you hyperfixate, well, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing anyway. So if you're good at prose, or you're good at, writing mechanics or whatever, like, find the thing that does excite you and use your neurodivergence against itself. I think the other thing too, especially for a lot of people with ADHD and anxiety, I think one mistake is to overpromise. Like I know that I've had I actually had to fire someone recently. Not in it was totally amicable, but it was kind of a case of like I kept getting the same like, we're gonna get it done tomorrow, we're gonna get it done tomorrow, we're gonna get it done tomorrow. And it's okay to know what your limit on that is. Like, you're not doing anyone any good by continually moving the goalpost. It's okay to accept like, you can't do this. That's fine. There's no shame in that. Because the worst thing that happens is someone's going to be like, okay, well, I'll hire someone else. You know that, and it sucks, but it's better than just like torturing yourself over and over again.
And I can promise you, from a developer's perspective, I would much rather get the email 2 weeks before your deadline that I'm not going to hit this deadline because things are not going well for me at the moment, than me send you an email 2 weeks after the deadline wondering where your stuff is.
Exactly. It's like taking a date to prom, right? It's like you don't we stand there holding the corsage being like, where the fuck, you want to have that extra chance to like go see if you can go with your friends or something like that if you have to, or go by yourself even, as long as you know.
It is always okay to bow out because it's inconvenient, sure, but the developer probably knows like a bunch of other writers who can fill the brief too. And not that, it's always nice to have your individual voice on things, but like your mental health is more important and you're not making it difficult for other people. And it's hard sometimes to admit, oh shit, I can't do this. It's not one of the hardest things in the world, but it will save you a lot of trouble, and it will further your career to know when to say no to things and to say, I can't finish this. Well, because people will remember you being honest with them,
True. Travis, you're saying?
I was just going to touch on that and just say, I cannot summon in my mind right now, I cannot think of a single person whose career I know of has been negatively impacted by bowing out of a project because they had to. I was just
going to ask you, has that ever, like, is this going to, if I like, so I was like, say I have something that I signed up for in like a week or two past, I'm like, oh, like my mom's sick, I really got to refocus on this. I'm very sorry, I got to step out.
I'm not saying it doesn't happen to people, because who knows, but within my experience, it's never happened. And furthermore, people who are communicative about, I have this issue and I'm going to need to change my availability by X, Y, and Z are almost always among the people I think of the next time I'm hiring for a project, because I remember that good communication.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's an important part of that business relationship.
Yeah. So no, just be honest. It's easier said than done, but be honest with yourself and be honest with the person you're working for.
Be a good person.
Yeah. I really do think that the being honest with yourself part's the harder part of that.
It truly is. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that we kind of gild a lot of the stuff that at least our own work on our mind, where we think that our writing is going to be the pillar that holds the book up, or this like they can't go on. They can go on without you.
They absolutely can.
It's you're on part of a larger project. If it's your baby, no, we can't go. Nobody can go on without you because it's your baby. You know it better. But now if you're writing on somebody else's project, someone asked about getting into sensitivity reading. Does anybody know anything about that? I'm not sure if that's probably a specialized thing.
It is a little more specialized,
very much so. Yeah, I mean, I have perspectives on it, but I don't know anything about like the process of how do you establish yourself as a sensitivity reader.
I would assume that you'd have to have some type of credentials, and then you would reach out to a company and offer your services. Or
I think there are freelancers who do it too.
Yeah, and I would. Who you should honestly go talk to is somebody like M from Blackwater D&D was on last night for Grief and Death. They do, Faye does a bunch of that type of like a particularly grief focused sensitivity reading. Reach out to them at Blackwater D&D. Like, yeah, it might be good. Or DB Dave Walters.
Yeah. And to be perfectly honest with you, one of the things that would worry, that I would be concerned about, like if I were ever to consider some of that for whatever reason, obviously being a cishet white dude, not a whole lot of stuff I'm going to be doing that for anyway. But if I were to even entertain it, the thing that I would think you would need to keep in mind is you are now pinning a portion of your identity to a very public role. So just being aware of what that entails, right?
True.
That's something, and obviously I would say talk to somebody who works in the field because they would know better than I would. But just be aware that, obviously if you're doing sensitivity reading about SA, for example, that's now something that's going to be tied to your identity, right? So I'm not saying that's a reason not to do it. I'm saying that's a thing to be aware of.
Yeah.
As you're pursuing it,
Yeah, it also means if there's any blowback, if you miss something, or there's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, really. I mean, it's a really, I think it's a valuable role to have on a project. And honestly, I've probably all too often leaned on hiring people to write the material that would be able to bring their personal experiences that I would look for a sensitivity reader for anyway. I'm more prone when I'm in a development position to do that. If that makes sense.
What pops to the front of my mind that is the Book of the Fallen, actually the new one that came out not that long ago. The opening, the introduction to that talks a lot of like personal experience, and it's I don't know, that just popped into my head right now, and it's very. It's interesting because you get a lot of rawness there when you hire people with that type of personal experience who have gone through a lot of the subjects in particularly like things like Chronicles of Darkness or World of Darkness books or any of the story path stuff where there are darker themes, and they're kind of necessary themes for the world in a lot of ways. Like
it's funny, like from my experience, there's always a tension of writing, in particular vampires, because there are a lot of like, what does the vampire mean? What is the symbol there? And for a lot of people, it's sexual, and not, which I don't necessarily agree it is every time, but that is there. And like, it is it's a violent character. It's someone who steals people's blood. And to a degree, I mean, if you're not on board with that, you're not on board with that. That's not your thing. That's not your thing. But there are ways of presenting that you have to keep in mind that, about how not to be pure. That's kind of, I mean, when it comes all down to it, like something I try to do, like as a best practice is to not be puerile, and trying to find where that line is tricky, but like there is a level of horror and drama that's just like, does this exist just to make a reaction? Or does this contribute to the story? Is this there for a reason? And that's always the first question you should ask yourself.
Well, and one of the things to be careful of as a creator, I think, regardless of what your performance form is, by the way, because this is why I never got down with method acting when I was in film.
Oh, yeah.
and I tried to stay as far away from those who did as I could. You want to be real careful about how you're tapping into your own experiences and making sure that you're doing it in a way that you're not doing more damage to yourself.
Yeah.
And especially make sure you're not doing it in a way that you're doing damage to the people in your orbit. It's all too easy, I think, especially when dealing with harder issues, to tap into things you didn't expect to tap into things that are troubling in ways that maybe, make sure you got a good therapist on speed dial. Things like that. But and I'm probably being a little bit more flip about it than I need to be, because I use humor as a defense mechanism. But you can really, you can harm yourself if you're not careful. So just always be mindful. Be trying to do as many self check-ins as you can when you're dealing with difficult material and saying, "Hey, am I okay?"
It's really easy to delude yourself into thinking that you're using it as a processing rather than an amplifying, right? Like you're not stitching, you're tearing.
Right.
So yeah, be careful. So we've got about 10 minutes to wrap up. Why don't we all go through and talk about some just general advice for writers and to get them into doing stuff. Like what
it's the most rank cliche of all time, but show don't tell. But there is a limit to that. Especially in RPGs, where you do need to be straightforward about things, but like especially for more narrative oriented games like Chronicles of Darkness and Story Path and so on and so forth, like make sure that you can paint a word picture, and you don't need to be Nabokov or anything like that, but but be able to describe details in kind of a concrete way. On the other hand, and this is a problem of many older White Wolf stuff and older RPGs in general, is if you lay down a concept and make sure that you can do it in the game, because the worst thing in the world is reading a splat or whatever and then being like, oh, it says they can do this thing, and then you know excitedly turn the pages and like, there ain't no system for that, there's no way to do that. Don't make promises you can't keep, I guess. And don't create things that are not meant to be played, because this is another, this is an attitude more in the 90s than anything in RPGs, of giving you these resources and then saying, but absolutely do not use this, you're a bad person if you do it. It is just, make sure what you're writing on the page is for everyone. I mean, maybe it's for the storyteller, maybe it's for the players, but don't put a weird barrier on it, because then why the hell have you written it in the first place? That was a bit of a ramble, but there you go. There's my philosophy.
I think it's great.
It's a good idea. It's a good note.
What are you, Travis? Any suggestions for writers out there?
Like just in general. I mean,
in general, like, or getting into the industry. Like, how do you just send out like letters, dear so and so?
I mean, to a degree, you do. Go to the websites of the companies that you want to work for. Look for their submission guidelines. When it is safe and you're able to do so, go to conventions, go to online conventions, interact with people. And definitely, if that company has a community content program, make sure you're doing it. Because the other thing, a little industry secret I'm here to let you in on, is that they're looking. All of them are looking. Even Wizards, but probably not quite as close as everybody else is.
That's how you and I got in touch.
I mean, you exactly. You look at you see people that are doing things that you want to see, and you then reach out to them. So yeah, being a presence, whether virtual or physical, is definitely advisable. And just understanding that, it is a journey. It is not, it's not a destination. And I've had to swallow some pretty bitter pills in pretty recent memory about like, oh, right, now that this has happened, I guess I still better hit my word count today. Because I can tell you, the day that Technocracy Reloaded showed up at my house, my finished version of Technocracy Reloaded, my first mage book I developed, I was sweating out about an upcoming live stream and being behind on a deadline. I was like, oh, neat, my book's here. You know what I mean? It's a journey, and you're never going to have this moment where the clouds part and the sun comes down in one spotlight and you have arrived. It's just it doesn't work that way.
I was going to say the other thing, and Kelly is the master of this. Self-promotion. Like, if
I'm the master of self-promotion.
You're really good. You were really good at promoting yourself. And I mean that fully as a compliment. But like, if you are serious about making any sort of impact especially with community content, I would say this is more oriented towards, but if you are serious about getting sales and getting your name out there, you have to self-promote. You can't just let it sit there. Like, sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes, people go and they're like, the 5th version of V5 Sabat book and everyone will buy it. But if you're really interested in making a living, or at least making some scratch on it, you got to go out there, find the forums, find the communities, and put your stuff out there, and not feel too like, nobody likes to be imposing about this sort of thing, but you have to kind of get over that. You have to be a bit shameless in your self-promotion, and that's just you just have to get out there. And
two little sub points on that. One, remember that you are fighting uphill against an algorithm that is designed to keep you quiet.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? When you're promoting yourself specifically, 100%, you're fighting uphill against an algorithm that is designed to keep you quiet. They don't want you sending links to other places. They want you to keep people angry on Twitter arguing with you.
Yes.
So remember that, and let that be a bit of a balm to like feeling like you're talking too much about yourself. But also, I can tell you again from personal knowledge, 100% without a doubt, within my experience, people are more interested in hiring writers who promote themselves and who promote the work of the brands that they are engaged with, than those who just write good but don't ever share anything on social media.
Well, because we're spokesmen these days, or spokespeople these days, right? Like
exactly. 100%.
This one, and this always shocks me that people do this. I think that I've heard some more stories from Onyx Path people about this. Of like, if you submit something to a company, don't open with "this sucks, I'm gonna fix it."
Yeah,
don't do it because they hate it.
It's not the flex you think it is.
It's not. It's amazing how many.
You're like, well, why the hell didn't you fix it before you sent it in?
Many stories of people doing that, and I know that it's most of the time it comes from sort of a mistaken like attempt. They think this is what you need. No, they don't. They don't want to hear you saying that. Right. It is the fastest way not to get hired.
And it's about framing, and it's about, because here's the thing: if you frame this as this thing that you all worked so hard on is busted, and here's how I'm going to fix it for you. You're walking into a room. Remember, when you send in a submission, you walk into a room and asking for a job, right? Mm-hmm. So you're walking in. That's like you walking into a McDonald's and telling the assistant manager or the shift manager, like, oh, all your burgers are wrong. This floor is messed up, and I'm going to tell you how to fix it. And I'm going to do it in 1,000 words or less.
Yeah.
They're going to be like, good luck at Arby's because you're not working here. You know what I mean? Like, so it creates a adversarial relationship where you don't know. And even if you think like this discipline is broken,
you may well be right, but
right, yeah, don't frame it that way.
Yeah.
Frame it as, I was thinking of what I think is you frame it on your passion. I have found a way that I think that we can tackle presence that is going to be super interesting. It's going to tackle it in a way that hasn't been done yet before in the 25, 30 years of Vampire. And everybody who sees it is going to love it. Frame it that way.
Yeah.
Right?
Be enthusiastic. Be positive.
You have a very different experience when the human being on the other side who might have worked on the thing that you're proclaiming you're going to fix opens that letter to read.
This is absolutely true,
because it is easy to shade on older stuff, but it's always 2020. Hindsight is 2020. You know, like, because I've gone through a lot of old books, updating stuff, and you know, I'll be like, oh, this really sucks. This is really bad. But you know, like, I'm not going to go around saying like, hey, take a look at this, because actually writers, even if it's not directed at them, writers kind of hate that. Like, that dunking, you know, this sort of post-ironic dunking on old RPGs, a lot of people are really turned off by that. I know I am. I really turned off by that. Well,
it's just you're being negative for what? For credits?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, that type of bullshit onnui like kind of vanished, or it's so like 1990s grad student, or like art student. It's just, because we knew a bunch of guys like that in writing school, Sam.
I've known lots of people. I still know people like that.
Well, I'm just saying, like, speaking of just specifically, like, we know a lot of people, like, everybody does, but, like, do you want to spend time with those people?
Yeah.
Right? The number one thing that, I keep saying that phrase, sorry, guys. But it's like, Sam, you said that I'm the master of self-promotion. And Travis, what you were just saying, like, the thing that I really suggest is be honestly enthusiastic about your work and positive about it, because people want to be around positive people.
Yeah. Don't say I suck, but this is, you know, like, and that's like just.
And don't let the Gothic punk and the Bauhaus fool you. All right, the people that are making these games all like to be happy.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like we all like.
It can't rain all the time, Travis.
Right? Exactly.
Well, I joke that I write stories about loser Draculas. That's not me at all in real life.
You know what? How frustrating must that be to be a vampire and not have a castle? And just be like, and then to have like an elder vampire be like, you know, when I was your age, I had a castle. Well, fine, I was going to embrace too, but who embraces in this economy?
Right, exactly.
I can't afford to embrace.
I live in a box down by the river. Yeah.
Who embraced Chris Farley? Who?
The secret is all vampires are actually losers, but
right.
That's next level shit.
But yeah, just, you know, be positive and keep a positive outlook, and and put your best foot forward. And if you walk in and the first thing, because here's the other thing it smacks of, and this is a piece of wisdom you can take in other parts of your life too. If you walk into a room and the first thing you do to announce your presence is point out something negative, unless that something negative is being pointed out from the perspective of there's a fire over there, we should all cut out. It is that's going to set how everybody sees you, right?
Yeah, you're the critical one. You're the jerk. Like,
right. And absolutely, if the room's on fire, that's a different discussion.
Oh yeah, please share.
You know, but yeah, if you're walking in and saying, "You didn't do the math on this right," right? You know,
I've
created a wall. You know,
I won't name any names, but I had an interaction like that a little while ago. Someone on a forum was incredibly rude to me about something like that, and I don't think they were aware of how rude they were being. And it's just like it's kind of hard. Like self-promotion is difficult for me just because I find it rather tiresome. And it was the kind of interaction where I was like, I never want to do this again. So like, if you want to make life easier for creators, don't be that person. Like, even whether or not you're into, you want to be a writer or whatever, just don't
be a better human.
Yeah, don't be a jerk. Like, don't pick over.
How did you deal with that? How'd you deal with that? Did you did you engage?
No, I just didn't engage because it wasn't worth it.
I've started engaging.
It would just make me look bad,
See, with my brand, I've started engaging on YouTube when people really get on to us on YouTube for putting pronouns at the start of our videos.
No, okay, well,
it's like a 3-second thing. So I'm like, wow, if gender identity upsets you, wait till you hear about updog. Is my new thing that I always say.
I mean, caveat is if
there's no way I can lose. There's no way I can lose.
Because caveat to that is people are being bigots or whatever. Whatever, you can dunk on them all you like.
You can't beat them though. You can't because they're
but
just.
If someone's just I don't bother dealing with people who are just like, well, you didn't add 2 and 2 together correctly, and I'm like,
and my advice would be if there's a publisher that's publishing games that are bigoted, maybe don't submit.
Definitely.
But the other thing to consider, and I know we're coming up on time, so one thing I want to put in people's minds to consider as well. There are many people in all walks of life, but especially in this hobby, that do live with neurodivergence.
Yeah.
And that includes people working in this hobby, and that includes people who are opening your submissions and looking at them, right? Like every level of interaction in this, you might have people that maybe aren't, for whatever reason, aren't as socially adept. They might be dealing with their own rejection sensitive dysphoria issues, right? And so when you open your email with "you suck because you didn't, make this cost to humanity," you're not starting off that conversation on the right foot. It's not what you think it is.
It's amazing how much that affects your day as a writer or creator.
Oh yeah, it can really take.
Like you pretend it doesn't, but like you get a comment that's like, "I hate your channel, you're stupid." You're like,
I guess. Yeah, I guess the more, neutral way to put that is you never know what somebody else is carrying, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You don't know what they're going through, so maybe try to make sure that from the moment that they open the thing you're sending them to the moment they close it is a positive experience for them.
That's fair. I think it's a good one. Let's go ahead and say who we are, where we can be found. And Travis, I promoted your book in the chat. I'll do it again.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
That's the Kickstarter link. You can click the pre-order button inside of there to get a copy of it. And that's Scarred Lands. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Dead Man's Lost? Or Dead Man's Lost? Different.
Ooh, that's a different book.
That's the vampire book we're working on in secret. Sorry.
Dead Man's Rust is a campaign for use with Scarred Lands, which is Onyx Path's D&D 5e setting. It takes place primarily in the Hornsaw Forest, the Forest of Blood, and focuses on the Broadreach elves who are trying to cleanse that forest of its titanic taint, and a group of people called the Howl Legionnaires who have been given a second lease on life through being magically bound into armor. And they've created a new civilization, effectively a new culture that is imperiled by the sudden arrival of a strange and mysterious illness. And all these things are tied together, and only the heroes can save them. That's up right now over at Backer Kit. I would love it if you would pre-order it and check it out. You can get the manuscript when you pre-order it, and then you probably want to do that soon because there's other things that you'll be getting soon. So go pre-order it.
Nice. And so, Travis, we can find you on Twitch on Plastic Cage Plays, but you're also
That's
all
correct.
over the Onyx Path doing stuff.
Over
And
on Path a couple days a week. Wednesday night at 8 p.m. or at 9 p.m. Eastern, we are playing Dead Man's Rust. Actually, I'm running it by every first, third, and fifth Wednesday. And then anywhere on the internet, pretty much else, I am just at Travis Legge, Legge.
And on top of that, I guess you'll be seeing us soon enough because there's going to be an OPP con this year, right?
OPP con is the dates have been announced. It's June.
That's why I was treading careful. I'm like,
no, dates have been announced June 10th through 12th. And if you go to the Start Playing Games website and just search for Onyx Path Convention, you can sign up to run games and earn a little bit of money while you're running an Onyx Path game. And some of that goes to the charity of choice, which is Bodhana Group. And the Bodhana Group does therapeutic tabletop role-playing game work. So it's beautiful, wonderful charity. So yeah, head over and check all that stuff out. Faux show.
Nice. And Sam, let's hear about you real quick.
Yeah, you can find me. I think, Kelly, you may have put the link up. It's facebook.com/nonedarker is the little page I got going. I'm on Twitter. I'm the Third Duckman with numeral, not spelled out. And we just put out a book called Wild Hunt Gangrel. It is the fifth in a quintet of second edition Vampire the Requiem clan books. It is really great. It's huge. It's 170 pages. It's got stuff for everyone. Even if you love Vampire the Masquerade, there's stuff in there for you too.
I would give you ideas.
Yeah, I'd love it if people, especially Vicissitude, if you're into old school Zamisi, there's some stuff in there for you. Yeah, it's a fabulous book. I'm immensely proud of it, and I would love it if you go check it out. And if you do buy it, please leave us reviews. It's so wonderful to get reviews, and really helps things. So Kelly, you can put. I think you've got the link. You can.
I already just put it in the Twitch chat right there. So it's
go buy that.
A direct link.
And there's 4 others if you like that one. So.
Yeah, and if you hit me up later, I'll tell you which ones are my favorite. They're all good, but a couple of them are like have some real great stuff in them, like even better premium.
I do have a favorite, but I won't say it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Sam, for being here. Thank you so much, Travis, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
As always, I'm Kelly. Speaking of that, I also, Sam put out a book of my fiction there called Five Nights in the Windy City, which you can reach through that link. Yeah, you can also reach these links later if you don't have the cash right now. You can check it out during our Vampire the Requiem Party Monsters streams, which are the first Wednesday of every month. And you can get the books there, learn the new rules, some pretty cool stuff in them, really. But thank you so much for tuning in to Dork Tales Expo. It has been fantastic to be here with both of you. And I hope that everything's okay with John. It's probably just a time zone thing, and that we will see you very soon for tabletop games you should be playing that are not D&D. So I hope you come and join us for that, because we're talking about a lot of really fun stuff. And in the meanwhile, if you have a couple bucks, toss it in the kitty here, because we're trying to raise money for our operations budget. And with that, we'll see you next time on I guess in like 10 minutes. So see you in a sec.